Welcome to Strain on the Game, the podcast that reveals what it really takes to keep elite footballers performing at the highest level. I'm Stephen Warnock, former Premier League player, joined by physical performance expert Adrian Lamb. From training ground truths to the financial impact of fitness, we discuss the often overlooked challenges behind the beautiful game. Welcome to another episode of Strain on the Game. This is a review of 2025. This is going to be very interesting. So it's things that we've talked about in previous episodes, but we're just going to touch back on them to see more where the land lies, pretty much as to, I think we made a few predictions. I think we were looking at more so, our first thing we're going to cover is the Club World Cup, Lammy.
Yeah, well, we tried to avoid predictions because people
Yeah, we're not very good at that.
You got that wrong, didn't you?
Yeah.
So yeah, but yeah, we look at different parameters and different things, and we question, well, how might this affect things? So that, you know, we're going to be looking at the themes that run strongly through previous episodes, aren't we? So Club World Cup was one of the early ones we did. A thread that's run throughout the season is how injuries are going to affect the Premier League and the outcome. And then I think we're going to look a little bit towards what we've got in store for 2026 as well. So
Yeah, very exciting actually, isn't it?
I think so, yeah. So we should probably try to keep ourselves on a time limit. So we've said we're going to do 10 minutes on each subject.
Yeah.
To avoid waffling. So we're going to be in charge of the time. But before we get into it, what have you made of the Premier League so far this season?
Some of it's been boring in terms of style of football. However, big fan of direct football, big fan of the long throw. Love it when a long throw comes because I want to see if someone has got a long throw or it's a short long throw, which a lot of people have got in their armory. Do you know what I love? It's like everyone's suddenly gone, who can throw it dead long? And it's like that the pressure on that person now to be able to throw it like a low trajectory. But it's very interesting. The guy who worked with Liverpool in the past, he's worked with Brentford as well. His name eludes me. Can't think of it because it's just come to me off the top of my head. But he said you can train for this. You can train how to throw it long, how to change the trajectory of the throw, which I thought was quite interesting because I had a semi-ish long throw. But I'm thinking now I might get back out and start working on it.
the javelin, the jet propelled. Well, we had Morts, didn't we? We had Morts at Blackburn, and he took and he had a long throw, didn't he?
Yeah,
but he would take them on both sides.
Yeah. Yeah, bar for that was to get his running stats up.
Oh, he did do a high-speed run. With his running stats ball out of play were incredible to the extent that I did go, I think I've mentioned this before on the podcast.
I'm joking. He's a great fella.
He's a great guy, yeah. But I did say to Sam, you do know that a lot of his high-speed running is out of play. And Sam, being the professor of psychology, says, it makes him feel good. Let him do it. It doesn't matter. Because he'd have a good recovery, he'd get there, and then he'd be sort of positioning players. You just drop back a bit. You come shorter. Like, this throwing's taking ages, isn't it? But then that was him getting his recovery. And then he would put a rocket-propelled grenade into the opposition penalty area, which is, you know, brilliant football. That's what we like to see. But yeah,
the other thing I was going to say, how good have Sunderland been?
Yeah, I'm delighted to see it.
Your old club.
One of my old clubs. I've had more clubs than Tiger Woods, as you know. But yeah, I mean, I'm like the United Nations in that I have equal Newcastle and Sunderland affinity, which does not go down well with either sets of fans.
No, you know, I can imagine.
Pick a team, Lammy. Pick a team. But yeah.
I think that's been the story of the season. Paying.
Sorry?
Whichever one's paying.
Oh, whoever's sorting out the mortgage, that's the team I'm supporting, to be fair.
Correct.
Yeah, that's, you know, but yeah, I'm delighted to see Sunderland. They've been the success story of the season so far, haven't they? And then our old team, Villa, we were a bit worried about them at the early start of the year, weren't they? When they had a bit of a sticky start, but they've almost gone unnoticed for me. I didn't realise just how resurgent they've been. They're mounting a proper sort of title challenge.
Yeah,
They've been utterly resurgent, which is great to see, isn't it?
brilliant manager though.
Yeah,
Makes a hell of a difference when you've got the top man in the dugout and tactically you turn round and he's sorting things out. But the interesting thing was their business wasn't that great, or it didn't seem that great. So even when you look at the transfer deadline day, Harvey Elliott hardly featured, if at all. Jadon Sancho in and out, being a little bit up and down with his form, some good, some bad. Victor Lindelof, I mean, would anyone have seen him coming into the football club? I know he probably didn't have to move house from Manchester, so it stacked up for him.
yeah,
But he's not played either. So essentially, he's used the same squad as he had last year, and he's managed to turn things around. He's brilliant,
yeah.
absolutely brilliant. Love
And I
him.
think this harks back to, I mean, with this episode, we're harking back to episodes we've done previously. We did one on managerial changes and managerial casualties and the life expectancy of the Premier League manager.
Yeah,
They've stuck by him and they didn't panic at a time when other people were panicking. And he's rebuilt his reputation after a bit of an unsuccessful time with Arsenal. So you wonder if Arsenal had stuck with him, whether or not they would be reaping the rewards
yeah.
a little bit quicker. So there's lots of ifs and ands, isn't there? But yeah. And then I suppose we should really talk about your old club, Liverpool, and
Oh,
whether
that's
they've
been good.
imploded and what's going on there.
Yeah. Well, it hasn't been good for numerous reasons, has it? Obviously, the Diogo Jota situation, not ideal for any football club to understand how to deal with that. Then the introduction of two massive signings in Florian Wirtz and Alexander Isak. Wirtz struggled at first to settle in. I think he's found his feet a little bit more now. Isak, every game I watch him, I think he's nowhere near it. And we talked about that beginning of the season, the lack of a pre-season. We've spoke about it on a couple of episodes now on the podcast where he's found life very, very difficult. So I still don't expect to see the best of him until next summer when he gets a full pre-season. I really don't.
Yeah, I mean, we did speak about that in our very first episode, the importance of pre-season and the long-term effects of having a pre-season. So that's exemplified by the situation that Liverpool are having with Isak, I think. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Right, so
let's
you've got 10 minutes on the Club World Cup, and we are
right.
going to start it now.
Okay, right. So episode 3, we discussed Club World Cup, which was held last June and July. Seems like a lifetime ago now, doesn't it? And we then talked about the long-term impact that it may or may not have on players. So we're 6 months down the line now. So what have we learned? And to quote Pep at the time, he said, "Ask me in January." So we will. We
Yeah,
will.
hopefully someone does, because
Yeah.
we won't get in front of him. But
Yeah.
if we can't, hopefully I can get someone in the media to ask that question for
Well,
us.
yeah, I think it's an important one because it's long-term effects, and I look at it from two perspectives. I look at it firstly from the impact that it's having on injuries, and also then the impact that it's having on performances, and the impact that it's had on injuries. I think have been mixed. And listen, we did a session. We did an episode on injuries and the causes of injuries, and we said uh, the causes of injuries are multifaceted, and it's very difficult to point a finger at the Club World Cup and say that's responsible. So we need to look at trends and compare like for like. So there's some interesting numbers now. We're 6 months down the line. Chelsea, who won the Club World Cup, in terms of injuries that have caused players to miss games, they've had 12 so far this season.
Yeah,
But they've been to key players.
yeah,
They've been to really important players. And one of the things we spoke about in a previous episode is the importance of the best performing teams are the ones that keep their best performing players available.
yeah,
Cole Palmer has had an ongoing groin problem, and he's played, I think, 7 times this season, 8 times this season. It's one that seems to be getting better and then worse, and better and then worse. And groins can be really, really tricky. really tricky to get right because you do have that. And I think Yamal at Barcelona's having a similar sort of
He is,
problem
yeah.
where he's reporting. Sometimes he'll report he's pain free. Sometimes he'll report he's in extreme pain. Palmer's in that situation where they're going to try and manage him to the end of the season. That has implications for England in the World Cup.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
do we get him right now? From an England perspective, they want him to be right and to be firing on all cylinders. Chelsea will be like, no, we pay his wages, so we're going to try and get the best out. We want to perform in the league, and he's arguably our best player. But then if we look at some of Chelsea's other injuries, Delap pulled a hamstring in August, and it was a
Yeah.
bad one. He was out for a prolonged period of time. He's now out with a shoulder injury. So when I look at availability, last season, Cole Palmer played 55 games for club and country. This season is nowhere near that. Delap has played 8 games this season. Levi Colwill, he's not going to play any because he unfortunately suffered an ACL injury in, I think it was the first session of pre-season, coming back after the Club World Cup.
Yeah.
So he's missing that. And then if we look at Chelsea's opponents in the final, PSG,
Yep. Struggled.
they've had a massive injury crisis as well. And actually, Maresca has been quoted as saying the injuries that we're having, I think this was back in November, the injuries at PSG are probably a consequence from the Club World Cup. I think he's a little bit more open to being honest with the media about the effects that he thinks that the Club World Cup is having. Turn our attention to Manchester City, who didn't go as far in the Club World Cup as obviously Chelsea did. And one of the suggestions we had at the time, not a prediction, but a suggestion, was that because they didn't go as deep, it might help them because they didn't go on one of those crazy.
I think you said they've top loaded, didn't you?
Yeah, they front loaded the off season.
Front loaded. That was it.
Yeah, they front loaded the off season. Then they had a bit of a break, and then they had a little bit of a sharpen up before they got into the season. They've had 11 injuries so far this season. Most, again, we talk about injuries to key players, most notably Rodri, who's been problematic. But then if we look at, they're missing key players, but other clubs are missing key players at times, aren't they? When we look at the stats, and I look at, I rely heavily on physioroom.com. They look at it, and premierinjuries.com. Sometimes the stats don't match up and they don't add up because they look at stats in different reasons, but in different ways. But the actual stats suggest at the moment there isn't a real dramatic uptick in squad injuries in either of those teams. When we look at injuries per 1,000 minutes played, which is an important stat because it kind of levels the playing field. Obviously, if we're comparing Chelsea and Manchester City involvement in Europe and that they'll play a lot, we can't really compare them to like a Brentford or a West Ham or a team that's not playing.
They just don't have the same schedule and the workload.
The Champions League teams have played 8 games more than some of the other teams. But if we look at that as a league table, Chelsea have encountered 6.1 injuries per 1,000 minutes played, which puts them 9th in the Premier injury table.
Yeah.
And Manchester City have 5.6 injuries per 1,000 minutes played, which puts them 13th. So it's not a dramatic increase. But one of the things in that acute phase immediately after the Club World Cup, in the first 6 weeks of the season, we did see Chelsea have a real uptick in soft tissue injuries in the first 6 weeks, which actually was they had as many soft tissue injuries in the first 6 weeks of the season as they had in the entire 3 years combined in the previous 3 seasons. Wow. So that was like, this could be a problem, and they seem to have sort of ridden that storm out before. So
do you think there might be a period in this second half of the season where we might just see more effects of that, or do you think they've managed it now, or is it a bit of an unknown again?
Our good friend and contributor to this podcast, Dr. Robin Thorpe, had a really interesting interview in The Athletic magazine, which is a great resource for anybody
Bit
who's.
disappointed he didn't come to us first, but hey ho.
Well, unfortunately, he did this interview before. before
I'm joking.
But yeah, I mean, he's quite rightly said we're and the Club World Cup has meant that we're in an unprecedented time in football. And one
Yeah,
of there's 2 points that he makes. One, teams have to have a better interpretation of player monitoring and understanding and interpreting data from monitoring fatigue. And there's also a bigger reliance on squad rotation
yeah.
and
And
knowing,
Maresca does that.
yeah. And sometimes he can be criticised with that about that. You know, we saw the Atalanta result. He got a little bit criticised with some of his substitution decisions, didn't he, in the media?
Yeah, yeah.
So there are how you actually, one of the things that Robin mentioned is how you interpret data and use that to understand when players need to be pulled out and actually when players are coping all right with the higher workloads. Some players respond well to higher workloads. We could say, oh, he's played a lot of games, he needs pulling out. Well, actually, no, he's coping with it. And Robin will talk about, monitoring and really understanding what the data is telling us. So we could say on broadly, well, we would expect, especially with Chelsea, because they had a 12-month season last year because of the
Yeah.
starting time of their previous preseason and how deeply they went into the Club World Cup. There's a suggestion, logic would tell you, well, they're going to fall off a cliff at some point because they've just
Just
played so much
unsustainable.
football. How the absence of Delap, Palmer, Colwell, that means that there's been greater strain put on other players. The opportunities to rotate players have been a lot less. So, how that impacts on them, it's still kind of, we're in uncharted territory. So watch this space. But at the moment, Chelsea, from a performance standpoint, as we're recording this, Manchester City sits second in the league, and the performances. I mean, I'll throw this out to you. What do you think about the performances of Chelsea and Manchester City this season compared to other teams?
I think City have been brilliant, and I didn't see it coming. I'm very surprised at them, if I'm being completely honest. I think Chelsea have rotated as much as we probably thought they might. But City, on a whole, I think you called it. You said they'd top load it, and they've been very, very impressive. However, there's still a lot to go at. Lammy, I hate to tell you, mate. That's the
Yeah,
10
we're up to
minutes.
time, aren't we? So my if we're going to make a prediction and
Go on.
look toward the future, at the time, my feeling was that because Manchester City had front loaded their pre-season through the Club World Cup, had a rest, and then sharpened the tools going into the season, versus other clubs who went on these ridiculous long haul trips. I felt at the time that perhaps Manchester City might get stronger as the season goes on. That remains to be seen, but that would be an interesting one for me to look at. So,
Yeah.
Club World Cup, tick that box. We've done that.
Right, so we're going to move on and we're going to say, will injuries decide the Premier League? And what do we mean by that?
Yeah. So this harks back to episode 6 when we looked at we always had an injury episode planned, but we brought it forward by about 6 weeks because
They were dropping like flies.
3 games into the Premier League and they were dropping like flies. And, I encourage our listeners to go back and listen to that episode. So we're now at, I should point out, we're recording this episode on December the 14th. So by the time this comes to where, a lot of football will have been played that as we sit here, it's in our future. We are now 16 games in. Have things improved? Right. So that's the starting point. At week 3, the total number of players who were unavailable through injury sat at 71. And some of those were hangovers from the previous season. At week 16 or round 16, I did a very quick calculation. It's difficult to really establish exact numbers because clubs don't always tell you what's going on with the players. And also the numbers are really, really fluid. The players are getting injured all the time. There will have been players injured in games today that that we don't really know about yet. And other players will be coming back in. So the numbers change all the time. So you would hope that the numbers coming back in are greater than the numbers that are dropping
Of
through
course.
injury. My quick calculation that as we sit here today, 87 players are unavailable through injury, right? Which is more. So have things improved? Not really. But different sources analyze injuries in different ways. So if I look at premierinjuries.com, they look at injuries in a very different way to other sites. So those are the numbers, those are the sources of the numbers that I'm going to be talking about today. But in the episode, we focused really heavily on Arsenal. And we compared their injury record with Liverpool's.
Yeah.
We discussed to what extent the outcome had on the season. So Liverpool, as champions, were ranked second best in number of injuries. They had 22 injuries. Arsenal were ranked fourth worst, and they had 36 injuries in the previous season. As we sit here now, some media sources have Arsenal as having 28 injuries this season. The premierinjuries.com website have it as 14. Because they look at the numbers in a slightly different way. They only count them if they've missed a game, a Premier League
Okay.
game. And they discount injuries from the previous season. So,
Okay.
Jesus wouldn't have counted in their numbers because he was an existing injury. So you can argue the point and say, look, that's still a player that's unavailable through
Of
injury.
course it is. Yeah, yeah.
But we're looking at this acute phase this season. So premierinjuries.com have Arsenal at 14. But that's still, according to their figures, 2.8% more than they had this time last year. And they're currently ranking second worst in the league. Behind, interestingly, and I wouldn't have guessed this, Leeds United, who have 15.
Interesting.
So your top five, you've got Leeds of 15, Arsenal on 14, Spurs on 13, Brighton, and then Chelsea, who we've spoken about a little bit with the Club World Cup of 12.
Just a quick one on that. So when you talk about Leeds, do you think that could be either due to a small squad or just the difference in level intensity from the Championship into the Premier League?
Yeah, I mean, injuries are multifaceted. They're caused by lots of different factors, and each club will have different factors contributing to that. So
Yeah.
we can look at the training. Is the training in that Goldilocks zone where it's not too light so that players are not robust and resilient enough to the physical demands of the game and they're getting injured in games? Or is it too heavy so that players are going into games fatigued and causing injuries through that? So
Yeah.
training is a big one. Definitely a small squad will lead to an increase in injury frequency,
Yeah.
because especially with the quick turnaround in games that happen over Christmas when there's a game every 3-4 days. So you've got less opportunity to spread the load evenly through the squad. So if you've got how you construct a squad going into the Premier League season as a promoted side is really interesting. You look at Sunderland, they recruited 13 players through the summer, and they've done really well.
Yeah.
And they've actually got a really good injury record at the moment as well. So looking at recruitment, the intensity of the Premier League, the speed of the game, how different that is. Yeah, recruitment certainly plays into that, but that's a
Has to.
balancing act. There's
Yeah.
lots of different factors which can go into it. So Ben Dinnery, who's an analyst at premierinjuries.com, he's done a little article on Arsenal, and he's basically said, look, raw totals, when you look at absolute figures, it lacks context in terms of the additional demands of playing European football that
Yeah.
Arsenal are so again, to level the playing field, and we've spoken about this, he looks at injuries per 1,000 minutes. And again, Leeds come out top. They have 10.4 injuries per 1,000 minutes played. So even though they're playing less games, their injury incidence is quite high.
Yeah.
Brighton are second at 7.4. Arsenal are third at 7.1. And this, this is meaningful. And Arteta is being asked about that in press conferences. So looking at some of the quotes from Arteta, there's a suggestion from a journalist that was he overtraining players? Was he doing too much? Was the training too intense? And his response is, we don't have time to train. But one of the things that he did highlight was that some of his players have played 150 games in 2 seasons, as he's said. So there's some overload there. And then, I don't know about how accurate those figures are. That's 75 games a season, but that's his figures.
It's a lot, isn't it?
If you've got a significant number, and Arsenal are typically running around 6 or 7 injuries, then you're asking the squad, the remaining players, to do more, to carry an extra burden, to carry more load. And Christmas, that period, incredibly busy period of time, which play, recover, play, recover, play, recover. And if you're losing players through injury, then that burden gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So looking at Arsenal over December and January, December 20th, Everton away, December 23rd, Palace at home in the Cup, the EFL Cup, December 27th, Brighton, December 30th, Villa, 2 home games actually, and then January 3rd, Bournemouth away. So not a massive amount of travel. Everton away up to the northwest, but then Palace, Brighton, Villa is at home, Bournemouth away. Not a massive amount of travel.
Not bad. It's not bad at all. That.
We mentioned on a previous podcast, Arsenal aren't losing any players to the African Cup of Nations either.
No.
So
true.
I think that's it. But yeah, I think we're quite right to look at Arsenal. Is their injury burden going to once again be problematic in terms of will they be able to maintain their league position between now and the end of the season?
Yeah, it's going to be a massive ask, isn't it? And like you say, most important players, losing Gabriel and Saliba isn't ideal. They're the heartbeat of the team. They're arguably the best centre-back partnership in the Premier League at the moment, and have been for a couple of years. And if you lose those 2 players who are key players, interestingly, Gabriel was, I think it was a thigh injury playing for Brazil in the last international break, wasn't it? Which is not ideal at all. And again, we go back to previous podcast of looking after players and how they train differently when they're on the international breaks and not actually knowing what's going on when they're away with the countries and dealing with that situation. Interestingly, actually, he did it at the Emirates, didn't he? Playing for Brazil in Arsenal Stadium.
Yeah, you're dead right. That does play into the podcast that we did about, the issues associated with players disappearing for international break. There's also a relationship between the podcast we did on the relationship between injuries and the way the team play. So Arteta's on record as saying he expects his central defenders to sprint.
Yeah.
He plays those inverted fullbacks, doesn't he, which leaves gaps down the side. And obviously
strain on the centre-backs.
Yeah, so their centre-backs, I would expect, are doing a lot more sprint activity than other teams because of the way that they play.
Yeah.
So that when do hamstring injuries happen? They happen when you sprint. So that increases the injury risk, the way that they play. And the fact that those injuries are clustered around central defenders is,
huge.
If you spread the injuries around different positions, you can but if you're trying to put square pegs in round holes, all of a sudden, that then becomes problematic. So there's a lot of interesting things. Again, watch this space, but it's another one to look at.
Yeah. Okay, so we're 10 minutes are up on that one. We're going to move on. Hey, you're doing really well here, Lammy, sticking to the clock. Yeah, it's not easy for you to stop, is it, when you get going?
I talk to many people through the day, so you're the only.
No, it's very true. No one likes doing that, do they?
Those those cameras. Those cameras that people have in the house, and they watch what the dog gets up to through the day. I'm glad we don't have one of those, because it's like Lammy paddling about, talking to himself, wondering about content for Strain on the Game.
Brilliant.
So, yeah.
Right.
So we're going to go now. We're moving on to the third topic, which was related to episode 8. Are we watching the game or the data? And what we looked at in episode 8. And if you haven't listened to that, go and listen to it immediately
And why
after this
haven't you?
episode. Why haven't you? We looked at stats. We looked at how physical stats are used in the Premier League, what the data actually means. And the big sort of talking point in that episode is we really highlighted the importance of sprintability and repeat sprintability to effective football performance. We talked about football being defined as a high intensity, multi-directional repeat sprint sport. And we looked at the content of sprinting in games and how that had evolved over the season. So, 90% of sprints are shorter than 5 seconds in duration. Sprint distance comprises, only between 1 and 4% of the total running distance, but it is associated with the most important game-defining moments. And one of my favorite stats that I produce regularly it's an old one, but it's a good one, is when we look at the Bundesliga, 48% of goals scored in the Bundesliga involve a sprint action by the player scoring the goal.
Yeah.
So the more sprints that players are doing, the more goals are likely to score. So as a fitness coach, if I'm increasing the amount of sprintability of my players, and then we sort of summarized it with looking at trends, and we looked at over a 7-year period. Again, old data. The data's 10 years old, but it paints a picture. The number of sprints performed by Premier League players increased by 85% over a 7-year period, which is
Incredible.
indicative of increased physical outputs and related again to injuries.
Well, the
Um,
one thing I wanted to just touch on, and which I found incredible, and we're talking about styles in the game, and this year
mm,
we've got a more direct style of football. We've got longer throws, we've got longer balls being played, more direct. But people often don't think about, well, if the ball's traveling quicker, players also have to travel quicker to get there. So if there's a ball over the top, you've got to sprint in behind. The defender has to sprint to recover, but then that has a knock-on effect on the team. So now a midfielder has to sprint up behind that. So when you think about the game being played out from the back, you're never going to do as many sprints.
yeah,
So we're seeing a huge increase in sprints. And when you actually sent the notes over, I found this absolutely fascinating because the top goal scorer in the league this season, Erling Haaland, everyone will just think, well, he's fitter. He's had a good summer off. He's had a break. But actually, his stats are through the roof, aren't they? Not in terms of goals, because we always know he scores a lot of goals, but it's his sprints, isn't it?
yeah, yeah. So there was we were really looking forward this season to more access to physical output data through. There was an app called FOTMob that was producing. They produced it in the first week, didn't they? So we thought we're going to see we're going to be able to analyze physical trends, and as this review of the year is, we're looking at how those trends have impacted on the Premier League this season. We don't have that availability. They stopped that. So there was probably some licensing issues or
Yeah.
issues with personal data or what. I'm not quite sure why, but it's we're not getting it anyway. What we do get is we get some stuff through StatSport. It was the GPS company. And if you look at their Instagram page is really, really good, really insightful.
Brilliant. Absolutely
And
brilliant.
it shows it's very, very well done. But some interesting numbers came out of StatSport, and is like you said, Haaland is producing 56% more sprint distance this year than last. And you could say, well, we're getting towards halfway through the season. That's initially in the first few weeks and say, well, that can just be a blip. That can be put down to lots of different factors, but now it's a trend.
Yeah.
Will he be able to
Absolutely.
continue that trend throughout the season is interesting. His number of sprints have increased by 56%. And we, as you quite rightly say, that's not because fitness coaches are better. It's not because he's training differently or training harder. The physical outputs that produced by players are a direct consequence of the tactical model or the game plan or the way of playing that that the team employ. what's different about Manchester City this year? They appear to be a little bit more direct. They appear
Yeah.
to be a bit more transitional based than possession based. What would interest me, and I'm going to ask you this: do you think that Pep Linders, the assistant manager coming into Manchester City this year, do you think he'll have had an influence on that?
Yeah, I think he has to, and the reason I think he has to is that why would you bring him in? What's the point in bringing someone in if you're happy the way your team's playing and you don't want to evolve, then you just stick to what you know, but what you know works. But Pep's not like that. Pep wants to evolve. He wants to learn. He shifts his backroom staff around quite a lot over periods of time. He's always done that because it brings a freshness into the changing room as well, onto the training ground, to new ideas. I think it reinvigorates him as a person as well. I think it gives him fresh ideas. We all talk about Pep Guardiola as the absolute guru of football, but one thing he's very smart with is who he employs behind the scenes and how he changed things. And I think when you look at Jurgen Klopp's teams, Pep Linders was hugely influential in the training ground and what went on the training ground and the sessions created. And Liverpool were very good at turning the ball over and being very quick and direct into that front three. And I think we're seeing that this year with City. So yeah, the answer to your question is he's definitely had an influence on it.
Yeah, I'll look at. I mean, I'm thinking this is anecdotal, but thinking about the type of goals that Haaland's scoring. It was at Bournemouth. He scored 2 goals. They were both through balls, weren't they? That involved a sprint. You look at the sprint actions that he's performing. There definitely appears to be a change in the way that City are playing, and that really interests me. Another player, Foden, and this again comes from Stat
On
Sports
fire.
Instagram page. How well is he playing, by the way?
Brilliant. Absolutely
Unbelievable.
brilliant.
But in terms of sprint distance, according to Stat Sports, he's producing 73% more sprint distance this season than last.
Jeez.
So,
That's incredible, isn't it?
that association between how do you want me to play? Am I physically equipped to do it? The style of play is, we talk about physical job descriptions. Players have to be capable of producing the way that the head coach wants them to play.
Yeah.
So,
I think the other side of it, Lammy, when you were talking about does Pep Linders have an effect on it, I think he probably looked at it and thought, Phil Foden's one of the best talents in world football. How do we get the best out of him and how does that fit his attributes as well? And I think that's what they've probably looked at over the summer is that we've got players who are dynamic and explosive, yet we're playing a slow game
yeah,
that allows people to get set. It allows teams to well use your strengths. No one's
that's
catching
right.
Haaland. No one's going to catch Foden when he's running with the ball or getting into spaces. Doku, you ain't catching him. Savinho, you're not going to catch him. So you've got hugely explosive players.
Yes.
Use them to the capabilities. Use their biggest asset.
That goes back to, the episode that we did when we talked about managerial casualties and sackings in the Premier League. We talked about that. Does that philosophical argument, does the system fit the players or do the players fit the system? If you're a head
Absolutely.
coach, do you try to impose this preconceived way of playing onto players who are probably not equipped to play it? Or do you have a look at the players that are at your disposal and recruit players and say, right, this is what we've got. This is how we need to play to get the best out. And this is why one of my pet hates is when managers talk about my philosophy.
Yeah.
Just win. That's what. So yeah. And while we're on the subject of the Stat Sports sort of Instagram page, I'd encourage our listeners and our viewers to have a quick look at some moments of the game. So I talk about the decisive moments in the game. There's some great footage on there. There's Garnacho hitting 33.95 kilometers an hour to set up a goal against Wolves. Chiesa sprinting 50 meters at top speed in the 93rd minute to stop
Liverpool fans love that, by the way.
Yeah, but we talk about
But
the
being able to do
importance of
that,
93rd minute, the importance of sprinting to score goals, but also to stop them is just as important.
absolutely, yeah.
And they saved a point, didn't he? My favourite was Arsenal, we've sort of looked at them from a injury point of view today, but they're playing magnificently, aren't they?
Yeah.
Um, a 9-man sprint in injury time against Burnley. The game was already won, but and watch Declan Rice from the corner. Just watch him on that video. How hard that team are working for each other, for the manager to get them over the line. That's speaks a lot to me. But yeah, again, these physical things are in reaction to tactical trends. So, and I know we're sort of creeping over the 10 minutes, so I'm going to play
Go on, I'll let you go. Carry on.
injury time. So tactical trends that caught my eye. We've got the lowest number of passes since 2016-17 season. So this exactly what you said. Games getting more direct. Interestingly, I don't know, you see a lot more football live than I do. Man United and Spurs have increased their long passing the most out of all the teams, and a lot of teams have increased. So is that,
Yeah.
is that reflective of what you're seeing?
Yeah, I think it is. I think from a Man United point of view, they've got Cunha in, they've got Mbeumo in, they've got Sesko, who's a more of a target player. But I just think they don't have, apart from Bruno Fernandes in midfield, Casemiro doesn't want the ball that much. Ugarte, when he plays, doesn't want the ball that much. So there's an element of, well, let's get it up to the forward players quicker and give them have a better effect on the game. I think Thomas Frank's always been quite direct as a manager, even at Brentford. So I think that just suits his style of how he plays. I think obviously Tottenham fans won't be happy with that because they want the beautiful game played in a Tottenham shirt, but that's just part of his identity.
And there's other things that are interesting talking point that I'm just going to mention just because I find them interesting. More goals than ever after 90 minutes. Lots of late drama, which is fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's not actually. I thought, well, that's probably because we're playing extended periods of added on time through VAR, but actually we're not. We're playing less than we did 2 years ago, so that's interesting. We're on track for the most headed goals in a season. Arsenal scoring loads of headed goals.
Yeah.
You
Set
know,
pieces, a lot of set pieces.
yeah, but brilliant at it, aren't they?
Yeah, yeah. Oh
Effective.
God, 100%. Yeah.
And then two that caught my eye that I'd like your view on. First of all, kicking the ball out of play straight from the kickoff. And this is a tactic that it appears to have been adopted from PSG. PSG did it a
Absolutely.
lot
Yeah.
last year. And I read a report. Analysts, and we've got an analyst coming on, so we'll ask him, have judged that conceding a throw in the opposition territory is statistically more advantageous to us as a team than trying to keep possession early in the game.
Yeah.
Stat.
I think it just puts you on the back foot straight away. And you'd always say, like, get them in there feeling vulnerable straight away. I think if you're a home team and you start to press really high early on in the game, I think it lifts the crowd. I think it puts a nervousness into the defending team straight away. And it just changes the dynamic of the game straight away. It just puts you in the ascendancy. And I think it's massively important to do that. I think it'll be interesting because I think soon enough we'll see a response as to how to stop that. And what I mean by that is it'll be straight away, clear it high, basically punt it in the air and put it back on the opposition straight away. But because teams are still in that period of let's try and play out from the back, we can play through this press, we'll just flip it on its head straight away and
Yeah.
put them back under pressure straight away. So, yeah,
The
I understand it and I like it, by the way. I like it.
The tactical evolution of the game and how it, year on year, we see these new ways of how can we win? How can we put that team under pressure? I love it. It's brilliant. And you're dead right. You're dead right. Well, this is happening now, right? So what's the response? And then the final one, I just want to mention this just because I want to have a bit of a moan. Goalkeepers using cramps for tactical pauses in the game.
Well, they can because they're the only player on the pitch who can't go off,
Yeah, yeah,
and that's why it's used. I mean, the referees essentially should know that they don't get cramp or they shouldn't get cramp. If they get cramp, they shouldn't even be playing football
yeah.
because
And
they're not doing enough.
I don't know how you would stop it, but then again, the reason I mention this was it feeds back into these the evolution of physical trends in the Premier League. And I spoke a little bit about the impact that I think VAR has, how it effectively is a recovery period, which allows players to do more sprints. I think this is going to have the same effect if it becomes ingrained and endemic within the Premier League and nobody does anything to stamp it out, which will be
Yeah.
interesting to see how the authorities kind of use it. But again, coaches are incredibly resourceful and imaginative, and they think, right, how can I gain a competitive advantage?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
the only reason that coaches need to learn the rules is to know which ones they
How
can bend a little bit.
how they can bend them.
So
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. So that's our little review of the year. I think we
And we've
should
got
finish.
we've got some exciting things coming up, haven't we? So this is
Yeah.
our little the future episodes of Strain on the Game and what viewers and listeners can expect in the future. So I'll let you rattle through a few of them.
Well, I mean, yeah, I want to sort of quickly mention the guests that we've already had on, because we've had these
Brilliant guest. Lucky.
internationally renowned experts from world of football and the podcast. And if people listening to this episode haven't listened to some of these, I point them straight away. We've had Dr. Steve McNally, PGMOL Performance Support Director, former doctor at Manchester United. Brilliant insights into that. The England national team's head of nutrition, Dr. Chris Rosimus, lead performance chef Dave Pyle, talking about and looking towards the World Cup, the nutrition aspects. If you're interested in nutrition, go and listen to that. Dr. Dave Hancock, talking about injuries and this system that he's developed called the blind screen, which may have an impact on injuries.
Very quickly to jump in on that. I'm seeing Dave next week.
He
So
phoned me on Friday. He mentioned
I'm
it. Yeah.
gonna go for food with him. Me and Kelly
Yeah.
are going for food with him and his wife. So I can't wait to meet up with him,
I
sort his
think,
meal out, pay for his meal as a thank you for coming
well, you
on.
don't need to do that. No, no.
Oh, okay, perfect. I'll say you'll pay for it then.
He can take it out of what he owes me.
Yeah. Carry on.
Steve Baharrell, CEO of Newcastle United
Oh, brilliant.
Foundation.
That was a great episode, by the way.
Yeah, the work that Newcastle United are doing in the community and talking about, at this time of year, the link between the football club and the community is never more
Superb.
apparent than ever before. Jamil, our friend, performance psychologist, was a brilliant episode.
I could sit and listen to Jamil all day.
Do you
Really
know
could.
what? Do you know what? A different story pop into my head, but when he spoke about the prisoner of war who played golf in his head, and then throughout the whole time he was incarcerated, and then went out and played the perfect round.
How good was that?
The power of the mind, it's unbelievable.
Hey, I've tried that. It doesn't work.
Yeah, because in your imagination you shank it off the first, don't you?
Not in my. Hey, I don't want to do that, but it just happens.
Yeah, you can't imagine. And then, Dr. Robin Thorpe. People say they struggle to get doctors. We don't. It's when he talks, former director of performance at Red Bull, former senior performance scientist at Manchester United. Brilliant 2-part episode talking about recovery and regeneration and the insights that he's had. And he's now the go-to guy in world football, and Premier League clubs are using his skills and his knowledge, consulting on how to improve their recovery delivery. So, that's where we've been. How do we top that? No review episode would be complete without a look into the future, Stephen. So here's to our listeners what you have to look forward to next year. So we've got coming your way, we've got an analyst, a Premier League analyst, who's going to tell us the role of the analyst and what do they do, these computer boffins, and how that's changed the game.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to
I can't wait to learn a little bit about that. I'm looking forward to that one.
Yeah, I mean, I know a little bit, but probably, not to the extent that it's really growing. I mean, we're seeing analysts now becoming coaches, which is the
Absolutely, yeah.
talking point, isn't it? So
Yeah.
how's that gone? We've got what's the most important person at a club? I would argue the guy who's in charge of bringing players to the club, the head of recruitment. So what's that process look like?
Yeah,
It-
the manager's always the most important, but I understand your point.
do you know what I mean? Yeah, but are we bringing in the right players? Are we bringing in
Well, if he doesn't
what
do
is
that, we've got an issue.
yeah? I mean, what does that process look like? How do we do it? How much does personality come into it? Are we just looking at so we've got a head of recruitment coming on. We talk a lot about injuries, and we did have Dr. Dave Hancock talking about injury prevention, but then a process that you and I are all too familiar with. When a player gets injured in a game, what happens next? What's that process? What happens between the fans seeing that player hopefully walking off the pitch with an injury, and then a certain period of time later, we see them running back on again? What happened between? So we've got a Premier League physio coming on to describe that process. Performance directors, sporting directors, what do they do? I talk extensively about strength and conditioning, so we're going to get a Premier League strength and conditioning coach, an agent. We get an agent on.
Oh, that'll be interesting.
We'll see. I should imagine that we'll interrogate that one quite closely, won't we?
Hopefully.
A big one that I know I don't know as much about as I should, but is going to be a really interesting one and a serious one. A former Premier League player is going to come on and talk to us about the mental health issues that players are facing in the modern day, and that's going to be a real open and honest conversation, and that's something that I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah, absolutely.
And hopefully that will lead to a greater understanding from the fans' perspective about what players really feel, The kit man. This is one that you've mentioned that you're looking forward to, isn't it? The Premier League.
Yeah, because kit men are great. Kit men are like the heart and soul of the team as well. You get a good kit man, and they're the heartbeat of the team. They understand the history of the club. They understand what's needed from the players to keep everyone going. They're upbeat the way that they are. Yeah, I love kit man. I think they're great. Every club I've been to, if you get a good kit man, you just know that you're in a good place.
Yeah. I would agree. Heartbeat of the club, and we talk about psychologists. Kit men are amateur psychologists, aren't they?
Yeah.
They're a shoulder to cry. So they are interesting one. CEO of a Premier League club. We're going to get one. We're going to get a former CEO of the Premier League to talk about, because they don't get a lot of credit for when things go well, but they get a lot of blame when things go badly, don't they?
Absolutely, they do.
So what is their role? And then I think probably most certainly from my point of view, and probably the listeners as well, we're going to get a number of Premier League players, both current and former and former managers, and hopefully one of the greatest, most impactful Premier League players ever to play the game will come on. So lots to look forward to in 2026, Steve.
Yeah, I can't wait. The list is very exciting. We've had a great sort of start to this year, haven't we? For our first 6 months of the podcast, which I think has been brilliant, and hopefully the listeners and the viewers have enjoyed it. So I think that's probably the best way to wrap it up. And yeah, let's look forward to a positive 2026.
Wishing all of our listeners a happy and prosperous new year.